How do we deal with a Russian president who clearly feels a level of impunity, clearly feels emboldened in terms of the actions that he has been able to take, both in his neighborhood, both in his own country, and even involving the United States of America?
Well, look, part of it, and part of the reason why he's been so successful at this and why there is that sort of sense of impunity, because in fact, behind the scenes, there were some punishments that were kind of meted out as a result of those actions. But it gets to the heart of our divisions, polarization and partisan infighting, because there's no us, there's no we, there's no United States in terms of the foreign policy at this particular juncture. And in 2016, the Obama administration hesitated because it was in the middle of an election season, an election campaign, and they didn't want to take an act that would look like they were getting involved in the electoral campaign because, of course, President Obama had finished up his 2 terms. And this is why the Russians intervened at that point, because it was a very fertile, propitious moment for intervention. We were uniquely divided, more so than we'd been in prior times. But this was a great environment for an intervention by someone like Vladimir Putin and the Russian security services. You and I have studied this for a very long time and knew exactly how to push buttons. And boy, did they push our buttons. So, part of our problem now as we look ahead is how we deal with that is we have to have a collective front. So, if anybody who's listening out there thinks of themselves in, kind of this identity, that identity, Putin doesn't care. He doesn't care whether you think of yourself, you're Democrat or Republican. He thinks about America. He's got Russia's unified interests in the foremost part of his thinking. He sees himself as an extension of the state, or the state as an extension of him, depending on one's perspective there. And we are not like that. Trump was all about himself, nothing to do with America or America first, just him. And, now President Biden has a real difficulty that, his own party is not pulling together behind him, let alone being able to bridge the divides over into the Republican Party, which is the party of one man. It's become the Trump rump Republican Party, rather than, the kind of sophisticated, kind of complex party that it used to be prior to, 2016. And that's our biggest problem. To deal with Putin, we have to have collective, coherent, concerted pushback. So we need to have our act together. And we have to have a coherent, foreign policy stance that has everybody, kind of on the picture, not having many members of the Senate just trying to win points politically by holding up ambassadors, which we actually need them in place. We need to have, the forward-leaning push of the United States, and then we have to be able to work with our allies.
Is this a moment where Russian President Putin actually feels now that he has more influence, more ability to shake things up and see what falls from the tree than he really ever has at any point since Soviet collapse?
Absolutely, Ian. I mean, if you're Vladimir Putin and you're sitting and looking at all of this, everyone says, the Russians have a weak hand. No, we have the weak hand right now. The Russians know how to play, and Putin knows how to play a weak hand very well. Does look like we do, so because we've been so used to having, no pun intended here, all the trump cards in our hands. We have always thought of ourselves as being in the stronger position, having all of the leverage. And as you laid it out, we have very little at this particular point. And our own internal dysfunction, becomes part of that. So, Putin looks at us and he sees pretty weak state. Biden's having an incredibly difficult time getting legislation through. We flip and we flop from one policy to the next every time an administration comes in. We're just all over the place. The power of our example is fading around the world. All the polling, shows that people no longer look at the United States as something to emulate. If you want to exert coercive diplomacy and take advantage again of all of these divisions and this polarization and mix things up and see what you can get out of it, now is the moment. And that gets back to, where I started from, is we have to get our own act together, clean up our own acts, but also try to get a bit more cohesion in our societies. Because one of the things that Putin himself focuses on, as you all know, is unity inside of Russia, but then taking advantage of disunity abroad. And that should be a lesson to all of us, because Putin loves our disunity. It's incredibly useful as a tool to exploit, and that toolkit that he has.